DNA home testing kits have skyrocketed in popularity, maybe even got one for the holidays. So have the unexpected bombshells some of those users get. 1 out of 4 end up learning about relatives they knew nothing about. About 4 out of 10 are surprised to find out which countries or continents their ancestors came from. And about 3 out of 10 discover revelations about their racial or ethnic background. An Emmy winner also learned some family secrets from a DNA test. Samuel Burke, a former colleague of mine, hosts the podcast Suddenly Family. Every episode, they focus on a long buried secret suddenly unearthed, not with a shovel, but with a swab. He now joins me, Samuel Burke, the host, creator of Suddenly Family. And I have to tell you, this is a remarkable podcast. And it was all started because you had a bombshell that you discovered in your own family, Samuel.
That's right, Michaela. I went into this thinking that it was going to be just like the commercials, that I would just find out how Jewish I am or maybe some fun discovery. But actually, there were 3 bombshells in our DNA, rewriting our family. We had a cousin who we believed passed away of AIDS, though we weren't certain how he had disappeared. And in the DNA, we found out that he had met a very different fate. My mom found out about a half-sister that she had no idea about. Her family had attended the very same synagogue as my mom. But perhaps the most profound and the most difficult one was in my dad's DNA. He's Jewish, and it shows up half Jewish, as we expected, but half Mormon. We didn't even know that Mormon could show up in your DNA, a fairly new religion that proselytizes. But it turned out that my dad was likely, though we don't know for sure, the product of artificial insemination, and they had used a Mormon sperm donor. But it didn't have the happy ending that so many DNA stories have in the commercials. He didn't get to meet a biological father. He found out he had a half-sibling that had actually taken his life a few months before this discovery. So we look at the reality of DNA testing in the series, and it's not always a happy ending, or there's a big fight to get that happy ending.
Well, and that's the thing. You see these commercials, and yeah, you know, there can be those outcomes. You can learn, but it is a veritable Pandora's box, right? Because it may not just be finding out what continent your family's history came from, because now people can find you.
Absolutely. And what happens if your ethnicity changes overnight? My dad had always thought that he was Jewish and Dutch. Suddenly he's Jewish and Mormon.
Right.
And what does that mean for him being anymore? And it's interesting. My dad told me a few months ago, you know, I've been Dutch all my life. I tell people that I'm 6'4" from my Dutch heritage. And I've decided I'm just going to keep on telling people I'm Dutch. And that's totally up to my dad and his self-identity preferences. But there's this other question that you're just really hitting on there, is these new people that find you. My mom's half-sister found her, and I started asking myself, well, what obligations does my mom have to this new half-sister? What obligations do I have to this new aunt? What's the real definition of family? Someone like you is actually really well placed to answer these questions, Michaela, because you've spoken so openly about your adoption and your birth family, your adopted family. What is the definition of family? And I have to say, if you listen to this podcast, I truly believe, because I got the answer from it, that you will get the answer about what family really is.
Absolutely.
The people who show up for you.
The people who show up for you. And, you know, it's really interesting, too, because in each family, they handle the earthquakes differently. I've had a chance to listen to the podcast, and every family is unique, and the information they find is unique, and how they reconcile and deal with it. How did your family deal with the vibrational effect of the information that you all uncovered?
Well, my mom asked for a glass of wine the first night when she discovered. That's sometimes the first step. But I think it really is about building trust. That actually you're seeing on the screen right there the first time that my mom met her half-sister in California. And I think it is about showing over time if you'll show up for that person. And if you prove that in the pandemic somebody needs groceries and you'll bring it over, that can really show what family is. For my dad, I think it's been a lot harder. He hasn't been able to meet any of his new Mormon relatives in Utah or form those bonds. And so I think sometimes you're left not with a Pandora's box, but an empty box. And wondering, what did my parents know
Well
what
said.
didn't my parents know? So there's that difficulty. And one other episode I think really hits on something extremely important that they don't discuss in the DNA commercials. Two sisters, where they find out they're half sisters, and the sisters had the shock revelation that their dad wasn't her biological father. She starts forming a relationship with the new family,
Yeah.
and the other sister says, I was jealous. It was really hard at first. So these are the realities that we're picking apart in the
podcast, by the way, and I just want to point it out, it isn't so much buyer beware. It's more just eyes wide open when you take a test like this. Is that a fair assessment, Samuel?
Exactly. I mean, there's a gay man in the series who takes a DNA test. He's Native American and wants to speak to his ancestors. And he finds out that he has a daughter. Most gay guys aren't expecting a daughter in their DNA.
Sure.
And that's the man that you're seeing right there, actually, Wolf Martinez. But I asked him, do you have any regret about this, that a daughter was out there looking for you that you didn't know about for 30 years? And he said, no, Great Spirit brought her to me when he was supposed to, when we were ready. So I think his story really embodies, I'm not saying don't take a DNA test. I do have some regrets, but eyes wide open. Absolutely.
Samuel, I love this. I love that you're doing it. It is such a passion project for you. I want to point people to it. It's a great title, Suddenly Family. You can get it where you find your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube, all the spots. You stay well. Keep telling these stories. I'm really proud of you. It's very exciting to see.
Great to be with my TV family, with you, Michaela.
You got it, honey, forever and always.